Hi and welcome to the Byline podcast from the Byline Times. The Byline Times is what the papers don't say, what radio doesn't report, and what telly doesn't tell you. This time, Chris Packham's reflections on the jailing of 5 Just Stop oil protesters who've been given what are thought to be the longest sentences for peaceful environmental protest in British history. Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil co-founder Roger Hallam was handed a 5-year sentence. The other 4 defendants received 4 years each in prison after climbing on gantries above the M25, leading to the closure of the motorway for 4 successive days in November 2022. The sentences were condemned as punitive and repressive by the UN Special Rapporteur for Environmental Defenders, Michel Forst, who said they may violate the UK's obligations under international human rights law. According to the prosecution, the protests caused disruption worth around £750,000 and police costs of more than £1 million. But as we've observed before on this podcast, financiers, bankers and oil company executives whose work contribute to climate change are more likely to get a knighthood than a jail sentence. Chris Packham is an environmentalist, a naturalist, a broadcaster. Hi, Chris. How you doing, mate? You're right.
Well, I am okay, but I've had a pretty bad week. Not quite as bad as the 5 who are now somewhere at His Majesty's pleasure. But I did have to sit through the court case and listen to the judge pronounce his sentence. And it was one of the most grim moments of my entire life. You know, when people say they feel physically sick when they hear something sometimes or they see something, I'd never experienced that before, but in the aftermath of listening to the judge dismember any mitigation that they proffered in terms of their health requirements, the fact that they were carers, their age, their education, so on and so forth, in what can only be described as judicial thuggery without any shred of compassion, I did feel physically sick when I heard the sentences passed. It was a very tragic afternoon for 5 individuals, all of their friends, all of their families, for our climate activist movement, and ultimately for UK justice.
One of the strangest phenomena about this court case, and this has been a feature of other cases relating to environmental protest, is that defendants were not allowed to explain to the jury why they had acted as they did.
Well, that's one of the things that's, significantly worrying, because at the moment that method of judgment is focused upon climate activists, but the way that the law has been structured and the way that the judiciary is acting means that could be wrought upon any activist of any kind, any protester. So whilst at the moment it's focused on those that are justifiably raising the alarm when it comes to climate, let's not forget that, in a month's time, in 2 months' time, in 6 months' time, this could be about human rights. This could be about gender rights. This could be about the right to strike. It could be about it could be about anything. These repressive laws set a very dangerous precedent, and it's important that we do everything we can now as rapidly as possible, given that this case has reached a level of international condemnation, to make sure that these laws are repealed and more sensible laws are put in place.
What I found interesting about some of the media coverage, which, as you'd expect from the UK mainstream press, was pretty critical of the defendants, was that attention was focused on the amount of disruption caused to motorists on the M25, the notional cost of that, the cost to the police. And I don't say, by the way, that is irrelevant or insignificant, but so little attention was paid to the environmental damage caused by climate change, which is what the protesters were concerned about.
It's absurd, frankly. And look, this week I was present at the state opening of Parliament. What was the police bill for that? I mean, I stood there outside Westminster. There was a colossal number of police and security agents there. Obviously, we need them there. I'm not saying we shouldn't pay for them to protect our king and our new government, prime minister, etc. But focusing on the policing cost for this is not entirely rational. And also, let's not forget this week that a tiny blip in a piece of software shut down most of the world's airlines at a colossal cost to human experience, plus also to industry. But again, both of those things pale into insignificance when you consider the damage being done by climate, not just in the UK, but all over the world. And if you want to calculate it in terms of a pound, dollar, yen cost, then it outweighs anything that these protesters could do in millions of years of protesting. I think that the right-wing press, with their tags of eco-zealot, eco-loon, eco-mob, try to demonize these people to protect their paymasters, who are those fossil fuel giants. And it's, who are the bad guys here? Is it the people raising the alarm, or is it the people lighting the fire and fanning the flames? And there is no ambiguity, and we all know this, that the world's scientists, UN, Climate Change Committee here in the UK, have all said we've got to keep fossil fuels in the ground. It's one of the only ways that we can implement any adequate mitigation to deal with climate breakdown as it is happening and as it will happen in the future. But, there's a vested interest for the lobbyists that are paid by the fossil fuel companies. Let's not forget as well that, our previous Prime Minister acknowledged that the law which was drafted in the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act, which introduced this idea of public nuisance, was formulated by the Tufton Street think tanks, who, although their financing is cloudy, is undoubtedly financed by the fossil fuel industry. So here we've got the fossil fuel industry through think tanks who have access to government, implementing a law to punitively punish 5 protesters so that they can carry on with their bad planet fucking business as usual. That's where we're at. And then we have a judiciary which has gone rogue, frankly, in terms of implementing these draconian sentences. And I can only imagine that, again, those were imposed this week because Just Stop Oil had been very vocal about a campaign they were running this summer, which was going to target airports. So here we have harassment, intimidation, and those draconian sentences put upon 5 individuals who were doing everything they could to raise the alarm. And, when people say, as the Daily Mail frequently will, that people missed funerals, people missed important hospital appointments. I don't doubt that in a minority of cases that is the case. But the M25 is a bloody car park for 365 days of the year, and people will be missing those hospital appointments and funerals every single day, whether Just Stop Oil are involved or not. And when you consider the impacts of those inconveniences compared to what you can look at on social media today, with the flooding and the burning and the displacement of people and starvation happening all over the global south, thanks to climate breakdown, they pale into insignificance. We've got to take a reality check here on so many accounts. So I'm getting a bit angry, but I've had a bit of a week of it, to be honest with you. And the lack of perspective that's generated by the mainstream press and the lack of reasonable accounting from mainstream news media this week has been simply appalling.
Well, I think this is one of the most interesting things for me about it, Chris, is that the narrative is framed very much in terms of disruption to motorists and cost to the police. And as I say, those are not insignificant things, but weighed against the list of the problems caused by climate change impacting the world now, they are, if not insignificant, certainly very minor.
Very minor. And look, there are people out there who are calculating the cost of implementing the measures that we need to do to address climate breakdown. And they do come at a considerable cost. And they come at that cost because we've been putting it off for so long. Had we started to invest in simply renewable energies rather than Cameron cutting the green crap all of those years ago, we would have not had the energy crisis that we had over the last winter. We would have not had those fossil fuel companies, gas companies like Centrica, posting record profits, whilst people in their own homes in the UK went cold because they couldn't afford to pay the bills. The fact is that we became reliant on fossil fuels at a time when we could have invested significantly in the development and implementation of those renewables, wind, solar, etc. But we didn't. We did, unfortunately, cut the green crap, and that's left us high and dry. And now having to, run to catch up to implement all of these measures will come at a cost. But it's not an impossible cost for us to bear. And it's also not a cost which should come at the price of, as again, the right-wing media and the former government always protested, enormous numbers of jobs and difficulties for people in poverty in the UK. People are in poverty in the UK, and part of that is down to climate breakdown. There's no question about that. And that poverty will increase as fuel prices increase. And equally, as food prices increase, this is a global issue. We don't get our food out of the backyard. We get it from all over the world. And if you look at the temperatures in the global south at the moment, that will be significantly damaging crop yields. And there will be people going hungry, and we will have to pay more for our food. It will hit us again in our pockets.
I never understand why a government of any political stripe, because when we're talking about an existential threat to communities on our planet, I don't think this is a question of right or left. It sometimes is presented as that, but I really don't think it is. But I've never understood why governments of any stripe in this country have not insisted that as of today, all new homes should be designed to be carbon neutral. The technology is out there. Not only would that help us meet our various climate commitments, it would mean that the poorest members of society, if they lived in properly insulated homes, would have much lower energy bills. Maybe not zero energy bills, but very low energy bill. I mean, it just seems to me to be a no-brainer that as
It
of
is an
day one you would do
absolute
that.
no-brainer. And here we have a government who in the first 2 weeks have spoken very loudly and proudly about their desire to build lots of new affordable homes. That's music to all of our ears. Will those homes have solar panels on the roof? Will those homes have electric car charging points? Will those homes have grey water collection so that water, when it becomes a scarce resource, is being used efficiently in those homes? Will those homes, as you point out, be properly insulated? Or will they, as at the moment our new homes are, be the worst insulated homes anywhere in Europe? So here we're providing what, we hope that this government are going to build affordable housing for people, but will they afford to be able to live in that housing? Or will the developers just be trousering the profits because they don't want to invest that little more in making those homes sustainable? This is going to prove a difficult one for people like myself on another account. The houses have got to go somewhere, okay? And we've got concerns about biodiversity loss in the UK. We've heard about plans to build these houses on greenfield sites. There are going to be battles here. It's always going to be horses for courses. There will be better places to put these homes than others, and that's what we will want to find solutions for. But what is the point of putting them up if, as you say, they are not suitable for any degree of our immediate future? And that's what we need. But again, look, the house building lobby was certainly, the largest contributor to the Conservative Party in terms of donations. It was clear to see who was steering the ship. Well, that ship's got to, perform a pretty sharp about turn. And I really sincerely hope that, as well as pledging to build new homes, the Labour Party are going to say they're going to build the right type of new homes. And let's not forget as well, casting our mind back, because some of them are still going through the courts now, members of Insulate Britain, the precursor to Just Stop Oil, were taking to the M25 to block it because guess what they wanted to do? Well, it said it on the tin, Insulate Britain. These people have never been unreasonable in their demands. Just stop oil. What they want is a just transition as rapidly as possible away from our dependence on fossil fuels towards renewables. That's all they've been asking for. And in many ways, if you've been listening to Ed Miliband for the last couple of weeks, that's what this government are intending to do in some ways. So, one can only say that Just Stop Oil's campaign, as much as it might have irritated, annoyed, and inconvenienced any number of people, has made its mark.
Yeah, and we've got to reiterate this point. It may well be irritating, annoying, disruptive, all of those things, but peaceful, non-violent, not hurting anybody.
No. Senior politicians that I've spoken to over the last few years have expressed to me significant concerns about not listening to peaceful protest, because history tells us that if you don't listen to those peaceful protests and don't act upon them, then they escalate and they will become ever more violent. And that's not what we want. That's not who we are as climate activists. We are essentially completely pacifist. We are non-violent. We want to protect this planet, everything that lives on it, including all of those people. And therefore, we don't wish harm to anyone. But when we see governments ignoring their capacities to do good and protect people from harm, when we see insidious corporations still commanding extreme power and generating vast profits doing harm to our planet, we're not going to sit back and take it, because our conscience will make us stand up and act. This problem isn't going away. That's the other thing, which is so, I don't know, frustrating. Surely the government now, we have a new government, they must be looking at this, looking at the judgment that's been made, looking at the furore that's been generated in the first few days of their office. Bear in mind, this government said that they were not going to repeal the police crime sentencing and courts act. They were going to let it bed in and see how it goes. Well, we've just seen how it goes, and it's not going away. And I think if they were wise, they would do everything they could to address this issue immediately, and certainly make sure that the sorts of sentences that were meted out this week are never seen again.
Chris, you're part of an organisation called Love and Rage, and you seek to advance environmental protection through that organisation. So, what are your hopes for the new government? I mean, you'll have taken, I'm sure, a lot of hope from the fact that they decided that the coal mine in Cumbria, which had been approved by the previous government, they said that that was an error in law. So they forced a U-turn on that. What are your other hopes for the incoming Labour government?
Well, I am hopeful. I'm necessarily hopeful at the moment. I've had the privilege of meeting and speaking with Ed Miliband. I think he's a man who understands the problem. I think he's a man who wants to try and solve that problem. It's whether his government give him the capacity to do that, and whether our political structure enables that government to do that. He's appointed Chris Stark. Again, Chris Stark was brilliant at the Climate Change Committee. We've got the right people in the right jobs now, and that signifies significant hope. And what I hope to do is to be able to work alongside these people to drive these measures forward. My job, therefore, is to agitate and promote conversation, to get the public on board, to make sure that they understand why our politicians will have to act in certain ways, and why sometimes that will come at a cost to the public purse, or it will come at the cost that we will have to change our minds and the way that we act as individuals. We will have to stop imagining that everything that we are confronted by when it comes to climate breakdown is a problem, and start to see some of it as opportunities. And that's what we seek to present as Love and Rage, opportunities for positive change. So our first set of campaigns will focus on asking this government within the first 100 days of its office to begin the process of enacting some of its promises that it put into its manifesto with regard to environmental protection, animal welfare, and looking after and enhancing our biodiversity, all of which we are significantly dependent on. So these will be passive, non-violent actions. They'll principally be media-led, to be honest with you, drawing people's attention to the fact that the government have made pledges, and now is the time to stand up and make sure that they implement them. And I think there's a good chance that they will wish to do that. The problem is, will they be able to do that? I mean, let's face it, we can go back to Tufton Street and those think tanks. They haven't all gone on summer holiday. You know, they've probably been working very hard for the last 6 months, knowing that we were going to have a change of government, to insidiously weasel their way in there and start throwing their love bombs of big money about. And until we get on top of those lobbyists and expose them for who they really are, planet-destroying psychos, then we're in deep trouble.
Yeah, it's interesting in that regard that we've talked about the role of the media in terms of climate denial, in terms of focusing on disruption rather than the far bigger disruption that will ultimately be caused by climate change. And of course, it was a Sun journalist, I'm not sure if everybody is aware of this, a Sun journalist who attended the Zoom call on which the M25 protests were discussed, who actually reported Roger Hallam and the other 4 defendants to the police. And it was that evidence which helped to trigger the prosecution and amounted then to a charge of conspiracy.
So here are politics, here's our judiciary, here's our police being led by a tabloid right-wing newspaper. What was most sickening, actually, and I had to really put my keyboard down, was when I saw that journalist gloating the following day about the extent of the sentences which have been given to these climate activists. I mean, I can't tell you how I felt. I mean, there's a guy I met recently, actually, Jamie Webster. He's a singer-songwriter, wonderful bloke, writes some brilliant songs. And one of the songs he wrote was Scousers Don't Buy the Sun, because of the way that the Sun treated the Hillsborough disaster. I don't know. If I was a singer-songwriter, I'd be writing another song about the Sun this week. I mean, I can't think of, frankly, anything more despicable. And again, it was the vindictive, vicious, unpleasant, bitter words of that journalist. And equally, I saw a tweet published by the Metropolitan Police as well, where I felt they'd let themselves down. I mean, I work with the police all the time. I'm very fortunate to work with some remarkable police officers and police forces when it comes to addressing issues of wildlife crime. protection that I've needed when I've had death threats, etc., etc. And these are brilliant men and women doing fantastic jobs. But the tweet that I saw from the Metropolitan Police, which was again gloating over the extent of the sentences, I thought was ill-judged, if I'm honest with you. It didn't serve them any purpose. I want to continue to be able to work with the Metropolitan Police in a constructive way, but that wasn't very clever. And as for the Sun, I mean, I don't know really what to say. Like I said, I put my keyboard down because I thought it would be unwise to type what I wanted to.
One final thought. You've got Love and Rage, and you're starting to lobby government now through the various platforms that you have. And as you say, like Roger Hallam and the other 4 defendants in this trial, seeking to bring about change through peaceful, non-violent means, through the strength of argument. When protesters see the sentences that were handed down to these 5 people, what do you think it will do for climate activism in this country, given the importance of attempting to change people's minds? Do you think it will deter protesters?
No, I don't actually. I think that there may well be some that have thought maybe they were finding the courage to move up a rung in terms of their activism. Maybe they'd been previously signing petitions or whatever. Maybe they were thinking that they might take to the streets, but I don't think so. Looking at social media, this case has reverberated way outside the climate activist camp, if you like, and it's ignited a concern amongst many other people about the state of UK justice. And I think therefore, thankfully, it's become a bigger conversation. It's not just about Just Stop Oil. Just Stop Oil have irritated and alienated a large number of the public. But again, that's been facilitated by the right-wing press. I mean, the trouble with Just Stop Oil's protests sometimes is that what gets coverage is the method, not the message. No one can dispute the motive. The motive is pure. They understand the science, they listen to the scientists, they're scared, they're frightened for their futures, mine and yours, and they have the bravery to stand up and try and communicate that to the public. That's their motive. I don't think anyone could dispute that isn't pure at heart. The method is disruptive, non-violent protest, but in the hands of the media, all that gets presented is stories of the method. I mean, when it came to Stonehenge, there were 2 activists threw biodegradable cornstarch over one of our national treasures, a monument which I very much love. I live close to it. I went there at Christmas. I mean, it is, don't get me wrong, I love Stonehenge as much as I love Van Gogh and everything else, but when that was widely reported around the world, no one said why they were doing the protest, and they don't want to say that. And so it's left to people like myself who have access to media to make sure that the message gets across. So when we, Emma Smart, Fabian Harrison, and myself, Love and Rage, are thinking about how we are going to communicate, what we're focusing on now critically is how that we can control the narrative in the media so that we can get that message across. There is clearly no point in blocking any more roads. There's no point in throwing any soup over paintings. No point in throwing cornstarch over Stonehenge. It's all been done. And although it got a lot of attention, it didn't get the message across. And that's what we've got to be cleverer in doing. And we've got to find a way of manipulating that media to make sure that the message does go across. But it's hard. I mean, look, that weekend, those 2 protesters threw the cornstarch. It was all over BBC Media. The following weekend, I and others put a march on in London. It was the largest pre-election march in London. And we put between 60 and 80, maybe even 100,000 people on the streets to show their concern about biodiversity loss, animal welfare issues, environment, so on and so forth. The BBC did not cover it at all. 0 coverage, absolutely nothing. This is our national broadcaster, and it gave it no coverage. And yet 2 people throwing some cornstarch the week before, well, that's front page news. So what's the message there? Well, the message is, simplistically, you might argue we wasted our time with 100,000 people. We just needed 2 of us to chuck some paint somewhere. But that's not what we're about, because that message wouldn't have been delivered by the BBC or anyone else. We've got to be cleverer. We've got to come up with methods of protest which allow us to control that narrative and deliver the message hard and fast so that people can think clearly about the opportunities they have in their lives to make a positive difference when it comes to addressing climate breakdown. That's our mission. So whilst we continue to support Just Stop Oil, Extinction Rebellion, National Trust and RSPB, it doesn't matter who they are, if they're moving in that direction, we'll give them our support for that. But at the same time, I think that what we perceive is a sense of urgency that is lost upon some of the others. The scientists have given us 5 years. And again, looking at weather patterns in the UK, which we know are influenced by climate, and looking at events that are taking place in other parts of the world, football didn't come home this summer, but I can guarantee you one thing: climate change is coming home to the UK fast.
Chris, really appreciate your time. Thank you. And if you want to follow more of Chris's work in this area, do head over to the website loveandrage.com. That's loveandrage.com. My thanks to you, Chris. And just a reminder before we go to head over to bylineaudio.com as well. It's our new home for Byline podcasts. So as well as this podcast, you can hear fantastic offerings like Utter Bollocks with John Mitchinson and Otto English, which is funny and factual myth busting. You got a fantastic series with Bonnie Greer and Hardit Matharu coming, called Travels in Americana, and much more beside. So do head over to bylineaudio.com, and if you take out a premium subscription, you get content that you can't listen to elsewhere, including an ad-free version of this podcast. So thanks for listening. Thank you to Chris, and we'll see you again soon. Cheers now. Bye-bye.
Byline.